The moment 9-year-old Zariah stepped into the station, her world changed. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't said anything loud. She hadn't even looked anyone in the eye. She was just there because her school called the police after a fight on the playground. Zariah had been shoved. She'd pushed back. The other girl was white. Zariah wasn't. By the time Officer Brent Wallace walked into the room, the tension was already thick. A tall, stern man with a buzz cut and an old-school mindset, Wallace didn't like attitude. He especially didn't like it when it came from someone who reminded him of the streets he thought he'd cleaned up. Zariah sat in the holding room, swinging her legs nervously on the edge of the bench. Her long, beautifully braided hair flowed down her back, a style her mother had spent hours perfecting the night before. Her braids weren't just hair. They were history, culture, love, and pride, stitched into every strand. But Officer Wallace didn't see that. "You think this is cute?" he barked, grabbing one of the braids between his fingers. Zariah flinched. She didn't speak. She just stared at the floor. That silence? Wallace took it as defiance. "You're in police custody now, and guess what? You follow my rules." Zariah looked up. Her lip trembled. Wallace grabbed a pair of scissors from the nearby drawer. Why those scissors were even there, no one knew, and without warning, began cutting. One braid fell, then another, then another. Zariah screamed, not loud, but that low, broken sound of a child realizing something sacred was being taken away. Her hands tried to stop him, but she was too small, too shocked. Another officer, Sandra, a black woman in her 40s, rushed in when she heard the commotion. Her mouth dropped open when she saw what Wallace was doing. "Brent, what the hell are you doing?" she shouted, shoving him back. "She needed to be corrected," Wallace said coldly. "She thinks she's some street princess. This is a police station, not a beauty salon." Zariah sat frozen, eyes wide, hair half gone, scalp exposed. Sandra pulled her into her arms. "You're okay, baby. You're okay." But Zariah wasn't okay, not even close. Word of what happened spread through the precinct quickly, but quietly. Most officers didn't speak up. Wallace was one of the good old boys. He'd been with the department for over 20 years. He knew people. He had protection. But Sandra didn't stay quiet. She filed a report. She called internal affairs. She even contacted the school to let them know what had happened. Still, no one moved. Until the door to the station opened 3 days later. A man stepped in. He wasn't in uniform, but he walked like he'd worn one once. Tall, built, with a calm but lethal expression. His presence silenced the room. Even Wallace felt it. The man didn't raise his voice. He just walked to the front desk and said, "I'm here to speak to Officer Brent Wallace." The desk sergeant looked confused. "Who should I say is—" "Special Agent Carter, Zariah's father." The air dropped 10 degrees. Wallace, sipping coffee in the back, nearly choked when he heard the name. Carter wasn't just FBI. He was high-ranking, decorated, and very well connected. And Zariah? Zariah was his daughter. Not that Wallace had known. He never bothered to ask. To him, Zariah was just another poor black kid from the East Side. But now? Now the father he'd never imagined showed up, calm, collected, and very aware of his rights. "I want security footage. I want your logs. And I want them now." Wallace stood up. "Look, there's no need to bring the feds into this. It was just a disciplinary—" "You assaulted my daughter." Carter's voice was low, controlled, deadly. "Do you know what it means to touch a black child's hair without consent?" he asked. "Do you understand the trauma that carries? And you didn't just touch it, you cut it. On camera, in custody." Sandra appeared from behind and nodded to Carter. "I've got the footage. I backed it up. They were trying to wipe it." Carter took the USB. "Good." Wallace took a step forward. "She was resisting." "You're resisting accountability," Carter interrupted. "But not for long. Because now it wasn't just about a haircut. It was about a father's rage, a system's silence, and a little girl's stolen dignity. The day after Agent Carter entered the precinct, things weren't normal anymore. Not for anyone. The footage of Officer Wallace cutting Zariah's hair leaked. It wasn't clear who released it. Some whispered it was Sandra. Others thought Carter did it intentionally. But once the video hit the internet, it spread like fire. Not just in the city, not just in the state, but across the entire country. The headline on the clip read, "Officer brutalizes black girl over braids. Doesn't know she's FBI agent's daughter." Millions watched in horror as they saw a frightened little girl sitting silently while her hair was being chopped off like it was garbage. Her body barely moved, but her eyes told everything. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. Hashtags flooded every platform. Justice for Zariah. Us black hair is not a weapon. Fire Brent Wallace. Even celebrities, activists, and politicians began speaking out. Within 48 hours, it was no longer just a local police matter. It was a national shame. But while the world screamed for justice, inside the department, things were boiling over. Wallace was called in for administrative review, which meant, in reality, they were trying to protect him while hoping the fire would die down. "Just lay low," the captain said. "You've got years of service. This will blow over." Wallace wasn't scared. Not yet. He thought his badge still held weight. But what he didn't realize was, it wasn't the badge people were afraid of anymore. It was Carter. Special Agent Marcus Carter didn't just demand justice. He prepared for war. He filed a formal federal complaint citing civil rights violations, child endangerment, and abuse of authority. But that wasn't all. He also held a press conference. Standing beside Sandra, and with Zariah's mother quietly holding her daughter's hand, Carter faced dozens of reporters and said one thing that silenced them all. "My daughter was treated like property. My job is to make sure every child knows they are not." Then he paused, looked straight into the camera, and said, "Brent Wallace, I'm not just coming for your badge, I'm coming for your entire system." The statement was bold. It made headlines. And it also made enemies. Inside the department, officers were divided. Some believed Wallace was in the wrong but stayed quiet. Others whispered that Carter was overreacting, that this was being blown out of proportion. But one thing was clear. The department was cracking from the inside. And Brent Wallace? He was slipping. The pressure got to him fast. News vans outside his house, protesters outside the station. His own kids were being questioned at school. His wife stopped wearing her wedding ring. And then, an internal leak. A second video appeared. This time, from months earlier. Wallace yelling at a teen boy, mocking his dreadlocks. "No wonder y'all never get hired. You look like criminals before you even speak." That video hadn't been seen before, but now it was everywhere, and people connected the dots. Wallace's pattern wasn't new. He had a history of humiliating young black kids. It wasn't about law enforcement. It was about control, about dominance. And this time, he picked the wrong family. Inside the FBI regional office, Carter was strategizing. His team was reviewing every prior complaint against Wallace, especially the ones that had been ignored or closed with insufficient evidence. There were dozens. Parents who had been too scared to speak, children who thought no one would believe them, teachers who said they'd look into it and then forgot. But now they were being found. One by one, they started coming forward. An 11-year-old boy who had his hoodie ripped off in front of classmates. A girl who'd been handcuffed for talking back during a school visit. Every testimony made the picture clearer. Brent Wallace wasn't just one bad day. He was years of unchecked abuse hiding behind a badge. And Zariah's case cracked it all open. Back at home, Zariah didn't want to go outside. Not to school, not to the grocery store, not even to the park. Every time she touched her head, she felt the missing braids like phantom pain. But Carter sat beside her on the porch one night, his voice steady. "Baby, I know you feel broken," he said, "but you're not." Zariah looked up at him. "Why did he do it to me?" Carter swallowed. "Because people like him don't understand people like us. But that doesn't mean they win. Do I have to go on TV again?" "No," he said. "You don't owe anyone anything. You've already been brave. The rest? That's my job now." Zariah nodded, then said something that broke him. "I want my braids back." He closed his eyes, pulled her close, and said, "We'll make them even better." Because this wasn't just a fight about hair. It was a fight about respect, dignity, and power. And this time, they weren't backing down. The courtroom was silent, every seat filled, every camera live, every breath held. Brent Wallace stood at the defense table, his face pale. No badge, no uniform, just a suit too tight around a neck used to yelling orders. He was no longer a cop, just a man, on trial for what he thought no one would dare question. Across the room, Special Agent Carter sat with Zariah and her mother. Zariah had her braids again, fresh, neat, and shining under the courtroom lights. A quiet symbol of everything that had been taken and reclaimed. The judge, a stern black woman with glasses sliding down her nose, looked directly at Wallace. "You were entrusted with power. You used it not to protect, but to humiliate. You harmed a child, and now that child has shown more grace than you ever have." Wallace said nothing. His lawyers had tried everything. Character statements, years of service, even claiming misunderstood intent. None of it worked. The jury found him guilty. Assault, misuse of authority, intent to cause emotional harm to a minor. But more than that, he was found guilty in the eyes of a nation that had seen too many children like Zariah go unheard. When the sentence was read, it wasn't long. It wasn't life. But it was enough. Enough to take his badge forever. Enough to put his name on a list he could never erase. And enough to send a message to every other Brent Wallace watching. We see you now. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed for statements. But Carter didn't speak. Zariah did. Standing on the steps, microphone shaking slightly in her hands, she looked up at the cameras and said softly, "My hair was never the problem. He was." That was it. One sentence, and the world felt it. Months later, a community center was opened on the east side of town. It bore Zariah's name. The Zariah Carter Youth Center, a place for kids to learn, grow, and be proud of who they were. Inside, a mural of her braids stretched across the wall, each strand filled with the names of children who had once felt invisible. And every Friday, her father would visit. No badge, no suit, just a dad, helping his daughter show the world that no one would ever silence her again, because the gavel had fallen. But this time, it was in the right hands.